my Lord and my God. I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask you for pardon of my sins and grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my father-in-law, my guardian angel, intercede for me. Vanity of Vanities. That is a line from Ecclesiasticus, the Old Testament, where the sacred writer talks about something that kind of afflicts all of mankind, that we're kind of afflicted by vanity. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. In other words, that preacher in the Old Testament could see it back then, thousands of years ago, certainly over 2,000 years ago, seeing we men, women, young, old, we are afflicted by vanity. And in today's gospel, Jesus talks about the vanity of the Pharisees. He says everything that they do is done to attract attention, like wearing broader phylacteries, that's part of their uniform, and longer tassels, like wanting to take the place of honour at banquets and the front seats in the synagogues, being greeted obsequiously in the market squares and having people call them Rabbi. So Jesus, you could see that they just loved it when people came up and said, oh, you're Rabbi such and such, and kind of bent down before them. Or people say, oh, what wonderful phylacteries, or what wonderful fringes, or tassels, all this kind of stuff. And they were just purring with delight when these things would be said. And of course, they go around, strutting around like peacocks, looking for admiration. But Jesus' words are not just meant for the Pharisees. They're meant for me, and they are meant for you, because we all have a bit of a peacock about us. Don't we just love it when people speak well about us, or when we win an award, or when we do so much better than somebody else, or just simply when somebody admires our clothes? We love it. St. Francis de Sales speaks about this 400 years ago, so it's nothing new. And he could see a very similar thing in his own time. He talks about some people who are so happy with themselves because they wear fine clothes, they are riding a fine horse, or they have a feather in their hat. Or even, he says, he could have noticed that some men were very proud about their dainty moustaches, or their well-trimmed beard or curled hair, or their white hands, or their dancing, or their singing. And obviously St. Francis thought this was a little bit too much, a bit ridiculous. Everything about them was screaming, look at me, admire me, esteem me. But am I so innocent? Can we say it's just those men in France 400 years ago, or the Pharisees 2,000 years ago in Israel, or even before that with the vanity of vanities? No, this applies now here in November 2023, and you and I can fall into this vanity. Jesus uses an interesting word for the Pharisees. He calls them hypocrites. And that word actually means actors. It's a Greek word for an actor or a stage player, somebody who's putting on an act. And when we think of it, just as these Pharisees are putting on an act with their broad phylacteries and their tassels and their being in the first place in the meals and so on, well, you and I be a kind of actor, putting on a show for an audience. And that's a very dangerous way to be, actually, because then we're always waiting for the applause of the audience, their affirmation, their admiration, and we become very needy. We start to dread failure. What will happen if the audience start booing, or if they do not shout encore, encore? If they're fed up with my act, what if some other actor does better than me? And then we become very competitive for the admiration of our audience. And it's not a long step to envy. Envy, when that happens, we're envious when somebody else, their acting goes down better than ours. And all of this leads us to suffer kind of needlessly. It's kind of silly suffering because we're not actors. Or if we are acting, we've only got one person in the audience that we should be concerned about, and that is God himself. He's the only audience that you and I should be worried about at all. So vanity of vanities. Lord, help me to escape from this kind of slavery to an audience that doesn't matter. This neediness, needing affirmation, needing applause constantly, all the time. So tiring, too much. And we suffer when we put our foot in it. What is the answer to this? The answer, what is that? Just, there's only one person in my audience, and that is God. And the others, if they're happy, great. If they're not happy, I don't mind. That spares us so much suffering. I remember seeing a video of a grandmother at her birthday party, and her grandchildren had got a birthday cake for her with loads and loads of candles on top. She was quite elderly. And they were giving it to her and began singing happy birthday. And at the end of the happy birthday, she, of course, had to blow out the candles on her birthday cake, the many candles. And she gave a big blow. But she didn't manage to blow out the candles. What she did blow out, unfortunately, were her dentures. So her dentures went flying out of her mouth onto the cake. Her reaction, though, was wonderful. She started laughing and laughing and laughing. She thought it was hilarious. Beautiful. There was no wounded vanity on her part. And it was all being filmed and it ended up online. But she just thought it was so funny. And she didn't mind that others found it very funny as well, because it was kind of funny. So that's the way to deal with our vanity. It needs to be laughed at. You and I shouldn't take ourselves too seriously. We should take a leaf out of the book of that grandmother who knew how to laugh at herself. And pride is always very easy to laugh at. In comedy, it's always what's sent up is kind of pomposity. I just heard today the story of a wonderful Australian comedian, a guy called Campbell McComas. And from his student days, actually, he started doing this, which was pretending to be an eminent guest lecturer at functions and so on. And he would get people to get him along as an expert in whatever subject. And he would come along with a made-up name, names like Professor Max Cranium, which is a wonderful name. And he would address the whole hundreds of people in a big political meeting or a business meeting, and we'd address them and go on for ages, for half an hour, with this pompous speech and lots of nonsense thrown in. And whether those who eventually cottoned on to what was happening found it very funny. And it was very funny. But of course he was sending up our natural pomposity, our natural vanity. Lord, teach me to laugh at myself. Teach me not to be pompous. There's a last line in today's gospel which I think is very important, because Jesus says, the greatest among you must be your servant. Anyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and anyone who humbles himself will be exalted. God loves the humble more than anybody else. And the humble have one particular hallmark. They don't mind serving other people. In fact, they enjoy serving other people. The proud find it unbearable. It's the one thing they cannot do. That's why the devil's motto is non serviam. I will not serve. It's impossible. He cannot serve. The humble person says, I will serve. How much, God, you will reward the humble, those who in this life have served so much, humbly, joyfully, laughing at their bit of vanity and pride at times. How much joy awaits them in the next life, but also in this life, because they spare themselves so much suffering. I give you thanks, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations you have communicated to me in this meditation. I ask you for help to put them into effect. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.